Welcome to this BC Funding Solutions information session presented by the Body Corporate Independent Consultant Association. At the outset, I need to point out that we do not fall under the Financial and Advisory and Intermediary Services Act, yet we are highly regulated by the Sectional Titles Act and do comply with various other dispensations. So a little bit about BC Funding Solutions. They've always specialized in facilitating project and arrear levy funding to the community schemes. Now, that would be sectional titles, body corporate, and homeowners associations. They've been providing solutions for around 10 years now, with a book of just over 800 million Rand and a client base closing in on 3,000 clients. Sectional Title Solutions. BC Funding Solutions is the lending division of STS. STS also facilitates solutions in solar, fiber, smart tech, legal and advisory services, advertising within the sectional title and homeowners association environments. And its partner, Brightlight Solar VCC Limited, offers a Section 12J VCC opportunity. The executive within STS also have around 100 years combined experience within the community schemes environment. BC Funding Solutions and STS have always been members of the National Association of Managing Agents, of which they've got two honorary members in Justin Mason and Dr. Gerard Jooste. Now, BC Funding Solutions have always facilitated these loan assets, which means they've had to partner with a number of professional service providers. First of all, the distribution, BC ICA, or the Body Corporate Independent Consultant Association. I'm a member. We provide, or rather engage with clients to find private clients to deploy capital within this lending asset class. Gale Fund Services, this is our cash custody service. Gale holds 100 million Rand fidelity cover per transaction. I'll go into Gale a little bit more in a moment. Hollard is our insurance provider. They provide an insurance or a capital guarantee on one of the products, which we'll see in a moment. Waxmans, they do all of our commercial contracts and agreements, including litigation. Erasmus van Heerden, these are levy collection specialists. The bulk of their business is based on that collection activity. Then Moonstone, this is our the most recent addition to the fold in an NCA compliance role. Then there's also a number of legal opinions on our web portal. I encourage everybody to go and have a read through these legal opinions, because the legislation that I'm going to speak about in a moment, the legal opinions outline that what I'm saying is indeed true. Now, just to guide you, probably the most user-friendly one is the EYS, or the EY Stewart one, which is also endorsed by Weber Wenzel. So I would like to show everybody during this presentation an asset class that provides certainty and predictability. Now, these are uncommon things in the current market. We're not familiar with certainty and predictability in the markets. We're not familiar with certainty and predictability when it comes to our finances. There is so much uncertainty and insecurity. Now, I'm going to show you that this doesn't necessarily have to be the case, and there are safe havens with low risk environments out there. So what is it that we do? We provide our clients with access to what is usually considered an institutional only asset class, being lending. Now, capital is only ever placed within the sectional title and homeowners association environments, with a focus on special project and arrear levy funding. So lending as an asset class, we provide our clients with an interest-based return that is linked to the prime interest rate, therefore earning interest on a loan or a predetermined contractual rate, as opposed to a market-linked or a potentially highly volatile market-linked investment return. We do this with a low or no cost implication in a tried and tested legislative environment. Now, if I were to quote Albert Einstein, he would say, interest is the eighth wonder of the world. He who understands it earns it. He who does not pays it. Now, we're speaking about investing in a loan asset. Now, regardless of whatever funds or wherever you would invest funds, whether it's a BP garage or an antique car, you would need to consider three fundamentals. What is my risk? What are my costs? And what's in it for me? Is the risk palatable? Are those costs erosive to my capital? Is the return meaningful? Okay, is it outperforming inflation? Is it doing what it's supposed to do as far as my planning is concerned? And I'm going to cover these 3 points in a little bit more detail. Firstly, what is my risk? Well, lending as an asset class in this environment is considered very low risk. And the reason we get to say this is that there's never been a loss ever experienced by a creditor, a lender, or a client since the legislation was first introduced in 1998 and tested in 2001. Thus, 100% recovery track record for the last 21 odd years. Why is this? Well, sectional title body corporates are very unique borrowers. They cannot die, they cannot go insolvent. For the most part, they cannot borrow from a bank. And critically, lenders within this environment, or creditors within this environment, stand first ranking unencumbered creditor before SARS and before the big banks. Now, there's 2 pieces of legislation that are very important here. First of all, clearance certificates. A clearance certificate has to be issued before property can be transferred. Now, for a clearance certificate to be issued, all levies and rates and taxes have to be settled. Once that is done, property goes into a transfer phase, which means that our clients stand first ranking before SARS and the big banks, where they have their share of a recovery only in that transfer phase. Excuse me. The second part of the legislation says that every single member within an entire development stands in their PQ or their participation quota share liable for any outstanding debt. Now, what this means is that any loan asset is underpinned by legislation and secured by physical bricks and mortar to the extent of the entire development. Okay, that means that your asset is secured by the entire development where those funds are deployed. Moving into the bottom right-hand quadrant over here, Gale Fund Services. Now, this is a very important point because everybody focuses on the legislation, yet nobody considers the cash flow. Cash flows from a client via our cash custodian to the body corporates. And if there's a repayment, it goes back via Gale Fund Services and back to the client. Now, this is important. Now, as Gale is the only party that actually touches the funds other than the body corporate. And to this extent, they've got 100 million Rand fidelity cover per transaction. So in other words, the funds are safe with you. The funds are safe and insured with Gale, and then the funds are safe under the legislation with regards being with the body corporate. We've also got a capital guarantee and insurance on the Hollard product, which adds an extra element of security should you choose to go that product. Now, every asset class has got its own dynamics, and from what we can tell, the only real or potential risk to a client in this environment is timing. And the reason why we say that is a client may have 50,000 Rand available and wants to get into the market straight away. We can't do that. BC Funding Solutions has to do a due diligence. They've got to assess the body corporates. They've got to have a look at the market valuations, Windeed valuations. They've got to have an AGM. That can take 30 days just to organize or set a meeting for an AGM. It has to be voted in. There's a whole range of different tasks that have to be met for those funds to be deployed, which means that there's quite a long time frame on the due diligence, but not so much on the deployment. Now, this is potentially a problem because, or a risk because clients are out of market. Now, bear in mind, this is not a capital risk. It's an earnings or return risk. So the capital is never at risk. The same is true in that a client or a body corporate can make a repayment. If they make a repayment, the funds come back to the client. Now, where one of our products has a minimum of 50,000 Rand, if there's a repayment of 10,000 Rand, there's nothing we can do with it, which means the client will be out of market for that 10,000 Rand. Again, no capital is at risk, but there is a potential repayment or timing risk in that environment. BCFS also understand that life happens, which is why they provide the option for early exits. Now, that is the last point. I think it's just behind my picture over here. Early exits, life happens, a client has to exit. Now, this will attract penalties, and I will touch on that in the costs as we carry on with the slides ahead. Now, folks, we're in stormy seas. We're in one of the most testing, trying market environments that we've ever seen to date. These are stormy seas. Now, BC Funding Solution provide a solid foundation, a solid platform, and a light and dark stormy seas. And you'll see more as we carry on in this presentation. The second point is, well, what are my costs? Now, there absolutely are costs, but none of those costs are borne by you as the asset or the capital deployer or the creditor. None of them are borne by you. In fact, you earn one of those costs. Okay, 3 specific costs I'm going to speak about. First of all, prime plus a lending rate. That's going to be a cost to a body corporate, and that's going to go to you as the client. Administration, BC Funding Solutions, they facilitate this process, and as such, there's going to be an administration charge to them. BCICA, they partake in a raising fee as the consultants. Now, all of these costs are picked up by the body corporate or the homeowners association, and the raising fee could also be picked up by BC Funding Solutions. I spoke earlier about an exit fee. BC Funding Solutions understands that life happens and clients may need to exit their capital. Now, that early exit fee, we can't simply go to the body corporate, scoop back those funds and give it back to the client. We need to replace those funds with new funds. And this does attract additional raising fees. In the first 5 years, that early exit is going to be will be 10%. And after 5 years, it will drop to it'll drop to 5%. Now, exits free of any penalty, a normal process. I'll cover that later on. So they absolutely are exits free of any cost as well. Now, just to put cost into perspective, and this is a bugbear of mine and always has been for many years. Now, the top left block is pretty much where we work. Now, like I said, there absolutely are costs, but none of those are borne by you as the client, which means you get 100% allocation of capital, and every cent of interest is allocated to your account by way of the prime plus rates that are earned. However, if we had to take a look at other environments where, for example, if we looked at the bottom right and there was a 5% annual cost, this would cut out around about 61.1% of returns over a 20-year period. So you can see how massively erosive costs are and why the lack of costs in your environment is so important and so meaningful, so valuable to you. All right, and then I think the third point, and this is what everybody really wants to have a look at, is return and what's in it for me. Now, purely by a dynamic of being in a lending asset class, all of our returns are correlated to the prime lending rate. Okay, this is lending solution dependent, and we'll have a look at those in a moment. Now, it's very important that where this correlation to prime is incredibly effective is that there's no wobble, there's no volatility in this environment. By the way, prime has only changed 11 times in the last 5 years, where a typical portfolio will change on a daily basis. Again, you're seeing certainty and predictability. The capital growth products, from a compounding perspective, is one of the truest forms of compounding interest that you will ever see, because you're never coming off of a negative base. And then I think what's also very important is that the outperformance of inflation. Now, most investment goals or financial planning goals set to outperform inflation so that you can actually grow your asset. Well, to put that into context here, if we're looking at a prime plus 5, that's 12.75%. If inflation is 5, you've now got 7.75% as your real return, okay, over and above inflation. Now, this is dramatic in the context of a cash return, which is somewhere between 6 or 7%. It's vastly different. It's vastly meaningful. And as a diversifier in a portfolio, has a truly meaningful impact. So solutions, what products are available to the person on the street? Well, if you consider it from a life staging perspective, and you take somebody that's a little younger, and we look at the bottom left, the powered wealth, they may not have capital on hand, but they are able to contribute on a monthly basis. In this case, it would mean 1,000 Rand a month as a minimum. The rate that would be attracted here is prime plus 5%, and then there is a 60 contribution obligation. So 5 years worth of contributions is the obligation. Capital growth products are the Fortified Capital Plus and the Insured Capital. Somebody now is consolidating a portfolio. The Fortified Capital Plus is a single once-off contribution, also attracts prime plus 5% with a minimum of 50,000. Interestingly, interest accrues daily and compounds monthly. Now, this is probably the second most popular product within the fold, and you can understand why at prime plus 5%. Another version of the Fortified Capital Plus is Insured Capital. Now, that insurance element is provided by Hollard as our partner over here. That is a capital insurance, ensuring that all capital is returned to the client at the 5-year mark. Now, it does come at a bit of a cost, prime plus 3. However, that is still an incredible rate with a minimum contribution of 250,000 Rand. And then the top left-hand corner over here is our Income Energizer. Now, this is probably our flagship product. Even though the rate is slightly lower, 60% of the book is picked up by the Income Energizer for the simple reason that 9.5 out of 10 people cannot retire comfortably. Now, let me put that into context. Prime plus 3 is currently 10.75% on an annual basis as income. Most funds, you cannot draw more than 4% without having an impact on the capital. Okay, now that is huge. It means that our clients are generating in the region of about 9.5, 10,000 Rand per month per million. Okay, where in the traditional space, you're probably looking at about 3,000-4,000 Rand a month per million. Okay, before you start having an impact on the capital. Folks, that is dramatic. It's huge, it's meaningful, it changes people's lives. And that is why we've had such an uptake in that Income Energizer flagship product. Just to give you an indication of the compounding effect within our environment, this chart over here, first of all, it's not meant to be advice in any way. It's all available on the public forum, so purely the conveying of information. This is a whole range of different asset classes that everybody would probably be exposed to or experienced with. And I'm going to go to the starting point, which is this green line over here. That's inflation. That is your minimum benchmark. That's what you've got to outperform. Now, the scary part is that the two lines underneath that inflation figure are a multi-asset class fund in Coronation Capital Plus. It's one of their flagship funds. It has underperformed inflation over the past 5 years. And that's a very scary thought because there's a huge amount of retirement funding going into that environment. Another scary element is the bottom line, and that's the All Share Index. The All Share Index, which most of these multi-asset class funds are made up of a portion of growth assets, and much of them are equities. And you can see how they've underperformed inflation. This is a very scary environment to be in. We're not familiar with this. Equities almost always outperform inflation over a longer period of time. Then just pointing out this gold line over here. This is gold as an asset class. Now, while it has performed incredibly well, and in trying and testing markets, there is always that flight to basics, in this case gold. It's done well. However, it's incredibly volatile. If you had gone in over here 3 years ago, you would only recently have broken even. So yes, it's a diversifier, but a very scary, volatile diversifier. Then this line over here, the light blue one, just below gold at the end there, that is Coronation Strategic Income Fund. Now, this is probably the closest fund to what we have, yet what has always been considered really stable has also taken a knock recently. And then the last one over here, this is the Fortified Capital Plus under the BC Funding Solutions house. As you can see, there's no wobble, there's no downturn, there's no recovery off of a negative base. And if you look really closely at the end here, you can see a slight downturn, and that is the adjustment in prime. It's hardly noticeable. It is so marginal that it barely has an effect on any fund. And that is the difference that lending as an asset class can make. Now, if you consider even diversifying 10, 15, 20% of a portfolio in here, it's going to pull all of these other asset classes up. So true value, meaningful value, absolutely make a difference within a portfolio. Now, Obviously, the funds have to get back to you in some way or another. Now, repayment profiles, how do you get repaid? Full repayment has an average of 5 years. Now, we say average for the simple reason that, again, you've got this lender-borrower relationship. If a body corporate repays earlier, it'll come back earlier. However, if it is delayed, and for example, with a deceased estate, it can take a little longer. So that is why we say it's an average of 5 years. Now, BC Funding Solutions will also not hinder a body corporate or homeowners association from making a repayment. They're not going to penalize them. In fact, they're going to encourage them. The sooner the better. This does, however, mean that repayments from arrear levy loans can be bulky or small ad hoc amounts. And I mentioned this earlier on. If you get 10,000 Rand back, there's nothing we can do with it. Put it into a money market fund or somewhere where it's still kept safe, but we can't redeploy it because our minimum contribution requirement is 50,000 Rand. Remember, all of these repayments are free of any cost. There is no cost implication. This is the normal due process of a contract. This average of 5 years applies specifically to the fortified capital plus, the powered wealth, and insured capital, all of which you can redeploy assuming that we meet the minimum criteria. Now, the income energizer, we always separate that one because it does work differently. It's based on an amortized loan structure. Now, in an amortized structure, clients will be getting the interest portion as income, and the capital would be redeployed to keep the capital at the same level. At the 5-year mark, if a client does want to exit, they can give notice, and those funds will then be paid out over the following 5 years as an amortized loan. So both interest and capital will go out to the client over the following 5 years, free of any penalty. All right, folks. So that pretty much rounds up everything that we've got to say. I encourage you to go to the BC Funding Solutions website. There's a username and password that'll help you get more information. All the legal opinions, etc., are available there. So, folks, have a super day. I hope this has helped you and guided you a little. And if you have any questions, please schedule a meeting. Have a super day. Cheers. Bye.